What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswaves. So yesterday I talked very briefly around this graphical upgrade that the Switch seemed to have gotten. It was spotted through licensing in Switch Sports as well as data mining, and I had a lot of questions around this, so I thought we'd go a bit more in depth when it comes to AMD's Super Resolution and the Switch. Also, we are going to be talking about massive leaks that have hit the internet for some people, their most anticipated title for 2022. No spoilers here, just want to make you aware of what you should be looking out for the next week or so. And we're also going to be talking about an update that hit Fortnite across all platforms and has brought the conversation up around that Xbox controller. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the SpawnWave channel, make sure you subscribe down below and ring that notification bell so you can keep up to date with all the uploads here on the channel. And we're going to start today with Horizon Forbidden West. I'm very excited to jump into this game. Actually just finished up Dying Light 2 yesterday, right in time to get into Horizon Forbidden West. And it looks like there are several features that people are discovering, which does include gyro aiming. We can see this posted up on Twitter. This from Hype saying there's an awesome new gyro aiming option buried deep in the setting menu. It makes aiming so much easier. Please give it a try. This, I think, is something you would have to turn on then, so just kind of making you aware here, but it's basically like, okay, you do most of the aiming with the thumbstick, and then you do the last bit or the fine-tuning with the gyro itself. That's usually how I would work things in with some of these single-player games that would have gyro built into the controller. I don't typically use it with multiplayer, although I will say with Splatoon 2, I did start to gravitate more towards just using gyro completely for that, but something like Halo, I generally just stick with the control sticks themselves there. But really looking forward to Horizon Forbidden West, and I will be using the gyro here with that DualSense controller. Also, we did have Ubisoft talk quite a bit to investors around their release schedule coming up, and one game came up that I was a little surprised because, to be honest, I thought this game was just going to get canceled, but it looks like it's been rebooted to the point where they're looking to launch it in the next 12 months. That's Skull and Bones. Yeah, do you remember this one getting announced like 5 years ago? I think it was E3 2017. Since then, there have been reports that there were issues in development where they had to restart over and over again. But I guess we're going to be seeing it here pretty soon. We can see this posted up by VGC, where they say Ubisoft says Skull and Bones is now a multiplayer-first game. Shocker, Ubisoft doing a multiplayer-first game. The long-in-development pirate adventure is still due out in Ubisoft's next fiscal year. So basically, we're going to see it by the end of March 2023. Maybe they'll try to have it set up and positioned as a holiday title. And the first time they showed it, it just didn't really click with me. Like, it wasn't something that was very memorable afterwards, after their show was over. But who knows? Maybe they've done a lot of work, changed things up a bit to where I would be interested in at least giving it a shot. Again, Ubisoft likes their live service games, so it's not surprising to hear that this would be a multiplayer-first game that I'm sure they can lean into the battle passes and the microtransactions and the experience boosters and all of this. But I assume we're going to be seeing it here maybe over the summer with Game Fest, or Ubisoft just has their own show like Ubisoft Forward. Oh, and we've been seeing these teaser websites pop up, like from Capcom, and, well, it looks like we have another one from Atlus. Take a look at this. This was posted up. Hack begins. We have a little countdown timer here, about 4 days or so left, and it's for Soul Hackers. Yeah, I saw that. I was like, really? There was a Soul Hackers remake. It was Devil Summoner Soul Hackers on the 3DS. This was like a PS1 game back in the late 90s. But I guess that 3DS game came out in 2012, so it's coming up on the 10-year mark for it. Maybe they're thinking, oh, we'll just do a new one in the series. I don't know if they're going to remaster the remake, although who knows, anything's possible now. But with how popular we've seen kind of JRPGs now in a lot of these shows, especially on the Switch, it's not too surprising, I guess, to see Atlus maybe go back, take a look at some of their older properties and say, let's do another one in this series, or yeah, do a remaster and just bring it up to current platforms. But I guess we'll keep an eye on this teaser site and see what happens. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with this graphical upgrade for the Switch. It was spotted in some licensing and like the fine print for Switch Sports, and it was delved a little more into with the data mining that took place, but we can see this here. Posted up by NW Player saying, found an interesting license from Nintendo Switch Sports, lists Fidelity FX Super Resolution, referred to as FSR. And they go on a bit further to say it seems like Nintendo just added FSR to their AGL library for graphics/lighting, not available to third parties. They also note that FSR doesn't use any machine learning data. It's just a very fancy algorithm, so it's not as comparable to DLSS from NVIDIA or deep learning super sampling, where they would use machine learning to reconstruct images. This is AMD creating a very extensive and intricate algorithm. And the reason that, for them anyway, going in the direction they wanted was it would work on most GPUs basically. Even if they're older, it would still at least function to some degree. Now, there is still work that has to be done by that GPU, but it makes things like ray tracing and 4K much more viable, because when you turn that on and it's all native 4K ray tracing, I mean, you're cutting that frame rate down pretty bad. Just ray tracing in general, you turn that on, you see a massive drop in overall performance. That's something that FSR would work to mitigate. Now, if we take a look over here, GPU Open, they do have a bit of a better definition, I would say, for FSR, saying it's an open source, high quality solution for producing high resolution frames from lower resolution inputs. It uses a collection of cutting edge algorithms with a particular emphasis on creating high quality edges, giving large performance improvements compared to rendering at native resolution directly. FSR enables practical performance for costly render operations such as hardware ray tracing. And I've talked about this before when it comes to upscaling techniques. Like, I genuinely believe that since we're already kind of talking about 8K, like, that's gonna be really difficult to do that natively with ray tracing and all of this. Whereas if you have methods to upscale, say, 1440p up to 4K, or yeah, we get to a point where the GPUs are powerful enough, you go from 4K up to 8K with ray tracing. And you see all of the different benchmarks that AMD will put out there. You get on average 2.5 times the performance at 4K in FSR performance mode, which again, have a lot of charts, Deathloop, Far Cry 6, Resident Evil. The thing that's very interesting about FSR, however, is that they have almost a slider, I guess would be the best way to describe it. You can go high quality and basically lose out on some of that performance with frame rate maybe being a bit lower, but still better than native. Or you can just go full on performance and you don't really mind if the image looks a little blurry or there's artifacts. You just get the highest possible frame rate. So it's very customizable across these different GPUs. However, that does bring up one issue here, and that is it's game by game. As in Nintendo, if they are implementing this, as it's been noted for something like Switch Sports, they may have to configure it differently for like Breath of the Wild 2. But it at least, I think, is a better method than, I'm sure, upscaling they've used in the past. Internal for Nintendo, as FSR has shown some pretty good results. It's not as good as DLSS, but DLSS is very specialized with machine learning, neural networks, all these different things working together to give you, at times, a better image than native even, because it'll go in and it'll actually clean up or fix up some of the assets in the game even. It's incredible stuff. But with an older X1, something that came out in 2015, yes, it can technically use AMD's FSR technique when it comes to upscaling. And while it seems to be confirmed for Switch Sports, which I guess we're gonna see how it looks this weekend in the test, and maybe they'll use that to also adjust things like that slider in there for performance or resolution. I'll be more curious when we see this license pop up for a bigger game. Maybe Xenoblade Chronicles 3 could use some form of it. Breath of the Wild 2 is probably the one that a lot of people are looking towards. There are several games that the Switch would definitely benefit from a pretty good upscaling technique, as we have seen games kind of struggle when it comes to resolution or frame rate. And that's the biggest thing. They can go either way. Maybe they want a game to be 60 FPS. I don't mind if the image is a little blurry, fuzzy, or has artifacts around it. That's the best part here, is there are options to Nintendo when it comes to something like FSR, and the fact that it works with what's basically becoming a legacy chip at this point with the X1. Now, the biggest question I saw getting kind of thrown around has to do with, could this lead Nintendo into doing 4K with that newer dock that appears at least capable of outputting a 4K image? I mean, yeah, I guess that's the thing. Do you want to go from 720 up to 4K with FSR? Because it's not like the upscaling techniques are perfect. You're still not going to get like a great looking 4K image with that. It'll at least be better than 720 using some like basic upscaling technique to get there. But still, it's within reason. Like, if you went from 1440p to 4K, it would probably be much nicer to look at than going from 480 or 720 or something there. And that's, of course, if Nintendo is even playing it around with it for like 4K in mind, it might just be for frame rate. that seriously might be it, like, especially with larger games like Breath of the Wild 2 and so on there. So we'll keep an eye out to see if FSR pops up in some of the licensing going forward and see which direction Nintendo takes it. Next up, let's talk about massive leaks that have hit the internet for, like, basically the most anticipated title for a lot of people, and that's Elden Ring. Yesterday, it appeared that streams started popping up and screenshots, the whole thing. I mean, it just looks like the game's out there early, which it's out next week, so this was gonna happen. It seems to happen for every single game now, right? I mean, more so on the Switch. Like, if a game comes out on the Switch, you can expect it to have already leaked like a week ago and just be popping up online. People download it, play it on modified Switches. But even the PlayStation 4 is kind of getting to a point where it's been broken wide open, and you're starting to see this get distributed online easier and easier now, and that does include Elden Ring. And yeah, there was a point where the entire opening cinematic is out there, like a good chunk of like the first part of the game, even parts midway through with different bosses. And I'm sure we're gonna get to a point in the next couple of days where the ending is completely out there. I'm starting to see it show up on YouTube with thumbnails showcasing different bosses and so on. So it's gonna be difficult. I just wanted to bring this up because I know people are gonna get spoiled online. It's gonna be very, very difficult, but hopefully you can keep the blinders on as much as possible and get to next Friday when it releases. I just know a lot of people have really been looking forward to this game, and they're probably looking to go in as really unaware or blind as possible to all of the stuff that's been included here, because this does seem like From Software's like massive, ambitious project that's been really hyped up for a little while now. So here's hoping you can go the next week or so, get to that release date and experience it for yourself for the first time. So watch out for any forum posts that are like, hey, Elden Ring spoilers in here, because yeah, there's a good chance someone in there is actually playing it and posting up screenshots and videos. Next up, let's talk about a massive retro gaming find. Could you imagine if one day you bought a storage locker, you go in and there are tubs of just sealed Super Nintendo games, and not even like just the commons, like the really, really rare stuff? Well, that actually happened pretty recently, and it was even posted up on YouTube as they were going through all of these games. You can see this. This was posted by, this is Game Room. I'll have a link down below to their video that they posted up titled "Video Game Store Closes 1994 Inventory Found 27 Years Later. Factory sealed Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and yes, even Sega Saturn," which Sega Saturn games, I know we talk about obviously Super Nintendo games and their cardboard boxes would basically disintegrate over time. Those Sega Saturn cases are like the most fragile things ever. You'd open it and it just cracks in half right there, especially on the edges where it's supposed to hinge and all this. Anyway, they do go through some of the commons, like, you have like your Maddens and stuff like that, but then they get to like Chrono Trigger, Breath of Fire 2, there's Turtles in Time. We're talking about games that are worth over $1,000. I think Chrono Trigger is over $2,000 now, and these are all sealed, like factory sealed copies of games. Some of them even have like the hangers that you would have like to put on like the pins for the wall and everything. It just looks like, yeah, it legitimately came out of the 90s if you had just ordered these and they just came in and you were looking to stock them up on the shelves. Now, I assume they're just gonna list them in their stores, but who knows? Maybe they go out and they decide to get them rated, which would then raise the value. We know how that goes, right? But what a find, and it is still pretty cool to see this stuff happen. Sometimes we've even seen where massive amounts of games, like I remember F-Zero had a ton of sealed copies found and actually lowered the overall market value of F-Zero. I don't think that's gonna happen here, because while they did find quite a few of them, it didn't look like it was like 20 or 30 copies of Chrono Trigger sealed, although that would be pretty impressive. But a very cool video. I would certainly go check it out, especially if you want to see really what a lot of these games looked like midway through the 90s if you were just getting them into a store and they were sealed. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about an update that went live for Fortnite that brought up quite the conversation around that Xbox Series controller. We can see this over on the Epic Games website saying gyro aiming and flick stick comes to Fortnite in version 19.3. They say, while it's true that Fortnite on Nintendo Switch and Android had gyro-based motion controls, we've added more robust gyro controls to Fortnite on Nintendo Switch, Android, PlayStation 4, N5, and PC with version 19.3. Now, you may have noticed in the systems listed, the Xbox wasn't there, the PlayStation and the Switch were, and that's just because the Xbox controller doesn't have any way to take advantage of gyro controls. And that's just something that Microsoft decided not to do going into the Xbox Series generation. They wanted to keep controllers you had from the Xbox One compatible with the Xbox Series, and unfortunately that means it probably will miss out on features like this. That was something I brought up when they first unveiled the controller to basically be the Xbox One controller, just a little more refined when it came to comfort and different things around like the triggers and all of this, but didn't have like advanced haptic feedback or gyro, or even like what Sony did with their triggers on the back. And that now is kind of unfortunate looking at how the DualSense has turned out, where if you play a PS5 specific game like Returnal, for example, it does actually change the experience completely. Horizon Forbidden West, I'm very curious to see how they implement the DualSense controller outside of the gyro controls that we talked about earlier in the show. And it does make me wonder, should Microsoft have taken a different approach to the Xbox controller with the Xbox Series X and S launch? And that was actually our poll question as well. This where I asked, should Microsoft have focused more on the Xbox Series controller features like gyro or advanced haptic feedback with the drawback of compatibility from last gen controllers? Originally, I was just like, should they have done this? Like, should they have had gyro or advanced haptic feedback in there? And then I realized, well, there would have been a drawback of compatibility. They would have had to have cut things off from last gen. 58% of you said yes, 42% said no. And you know what? I thought about this. It may come down to, I guess, just where your priority is with games in general. Like, some people, I'm sure, don't care about the features for the DualSense controller. I actually think it adds quite a bit to the game. And even with what Nintendo did with HD Rumble, I think that also has helped out quite a bit with some of these experiences. But like on the Xbox, it just feels like a slightly more upgraded Xbox One controller. And unfortunately, that means that third parties have to kind of split up how they're doing things as well. Like, if all of them had at least advanced haptic feedback when it comes to the Rumble, I'm sure they would develop more so for that than now where they're like, well, the Xbox doesn't have it, so is it worth putting like that much more time into something that's going to be split either way? I do hope that Microsoft decides to maybe upgrade the Xbox controller here at some point throughout this generation, adds maybe the ability to have gyro and I would say advanced haptic feedback as well. Maybe not the triggers that Sony has, but at least that, just to kind of get everything set up on a more even playing field. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from Untitled saying, Spawnwave, why I'm buying a 3DS in 2022? Nintendo, we're shutting down the 3DS store. Hey, I made 2 videos last year. One was more than a year ago. The other one was like basically a year ago for the Wii U and the 3DS. And both videos I remember bringing up, hey, that digital storefront isn't going to be around forever. And I think some people told me that the 3DS store wasn't shutting down anytime soon. Pokemon Bank was one of the reasons, but the other reason is they sold so many 3DS systems. People still go on the storefront and it's shutting down in a year. I just decided to bring that up last year just to get people thinking about buying 3DS games, and hopefully you saw that and you started to maybe round out the collection a bit, because when that digital storefront goes away, or at least the ability to buy games on the digital storefront, I mean, those physical copies are going to shoot up even more so in value. I've already seen things like Dragon Quest 8 and 7. Those, I think, are like $100 or more right now complete. And trust me, several other titles that maybe are a little more rare on the system are just going to continue to rise in price going forward. So even though they're already jumping in price, could get a lot crazier over the next couple of years. And ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button, really helps out. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. There's Nintendo using AMD's super resolution upscaling. Do you think they're just kind of playing around with it right now with something like Switch Sports? Maybe seeing what they can do with it for the next Switch. And then also, what about that massive retro gaming find? A bunch of sealed copies of things even like Chrono Trigger. Thanks guys for watching. Have a great weekend. I'll see you back here Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time for Newswave.